Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. I welcome you all to the Hindu analysis for today. Before we begin analyzing the newspaper for today, an important reminder, as you know, we are all on Telegram channel now as Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Join this channel by clicking in the link given in the description of the video and you can get all the latest current affairs updates about the UPSC examination. Now, the first article that we'll be taking up is about India's position in the use of international law. Now, the author here is making the point that the Indian government, more specifically the Indian diplomats, while they give speeches all around the world in the UN and at different other platforms, usually the Indian diplomats don't really quote any international law. International law means a lot of treaties and resolutions that have been passed by the UN and other international agencies, they are very seldom quoted by the Indian diplomats. The author is saying that this gives a disadvantage to India. Why? Because when you are discussing international matters, for example, there's a debate between the diplomats of India and diplomats of other nations such as US, China, Pakistan, etc. That debate cannot be on the grounds of your national law. So while we are debating a certain point on what Indian government stand is as compared to what the Chinese government stand is, we should rather quote international law and not what Indian law is. And that is what has been missing as per this author. That is, Indian diplomats don't really use the international law. Now, if you look at the Constitution of India, we do recognize the significance of international law. If you look at the directive principles, Article 51 says that the state shall foster respect for international law. So, international law is what we do respect in India, but do we use it enough in making our point? Not really. The author here gives multiple examples. The author here says that India has been actually making sure that we participate in multiple international treaties, be it related to climate change, environment, ocean, space, etc. But if you look at how India has participated overall, it is mostly marginal in nature. Yes, we have initiated something called the International Solar Alliance. We are also a part of the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism. But again, whether we use these conventions or whether we quote these conventions in our debate, not really. The author gives multiple examples. For example, when we have any issue with China, like the one that happened in 2020, during international debates or speeches, we don't really quote any international law. Also, Pakistan has never given India the most favored nation status. That is why they have the right to still randomly put in any taxes on the Indian commodities. Even that has not been objected by India, which could have very easily been done at the WTO just by quoting the international laws. But we have not done that. The author says that maybe the problem is with the External Affairs Ministry's Legal and Treaties Division. So, as you know, the Ministry of External Affairs, just like many other ministries, have different departments. So, the External Affairs Ministry has multiple divisions. One of them is called Legal and Treaties Division. Their responsibility, as the name suggests, is to keep an eye on the different treaties that India is a part of and to give feedback to the government whether or not we are in line with that or not. As per 2021, while the maximum strength of this division was 23, but only 13 officers were actually working. Similarly, even while taking decision about international law, different ministries are involved in India. We have finance ministry, commerce, law, environment, all of these taking different decisions with respect to their own domain on international law. And that also does not augur well. The author also says that the Indian government has not given a lot of importance to understanding of international law in India. For example, the External Affairs Ministry runs some research centers such as the Indian Council of World Affairs. On the other hand, look at what China is doing. China has put in a lot of resources to set up many universities within the country that have discussions on international laws, because of which, if you look at India, the population that we have, ideally, we should have had many people in India who are experts of diplomacy and international law without even entering the government service, which is not really the case. China, on the other hand, has benefited out of this. China has a lot of people who are the experts of international law and they suggest to the government how to use or how to find loopholes in such laws as well. Another example can be the Indian Society of International Law, established in 1959. They publish their own journal that is not given a lot of importance. On the other hand, at the same time, the Chinese Journal of International Law actually is one of the top ranked journals in the entire world if anyone wants to read about international diplomacy. Now, you might argue that these things are not that important, these things don't really translate into any real power, but you have to understand all these things together make up the soft power of a country. It is not just about economics. It is not just about the money that you have or the military prowess that you have. It is also about whether or not a literature coming from your country is respected around the world. Whether or not you have experts of certain field or not. This is where India, as per the author, has been lacking. Now, I wanted to take you one step away from what the topic is and discuss mainly about international laws and how they are interpreted by the judiciary in India. Now, the reality is the Indian judiciary does not have the power to make laws. They only interpret the laws of the government and also international obligations that the Indian government has. Whenever an international treaty is signed by India and ratified by the parliament, after that, the court gets empowered to interpret those treaties, to fill in any gap in the law, to add to their interpretation as well. That is why you can say that the Indian courts also have the duty to ensure implementation of international law treaties in India. Now, there are multiple examples of Supreme Court cases which show how the court has actually quoted many international laws and treaties while presiding over cases in India as well. For example, in the famous Vishakha guideline case of 1997, the Supreme Court, while giving these guidelines, referred to many international conventions and norms which were relevant to ensure gender equality, right to work with dignity, and also the articles of our own Indian Constitution's Part 3. Even in Nilabati Behra versus the state of Odisha case, the Supreme Court relied on the covenant of civil and political rights while giving compensation to the victim on the matter of custodial death. There are many other examples of where the Supreme Court and even the High Courts time and again have quoted international laws. And it is time for our diplomats also to use these kind of international conventions while debating for India's right at the international stage. The next article that we have here is about India's opportunity while India will be hosting the G20 summit very soon. The authors here are saying that for Indian diplomats and India's external affairs ministry specifically, this is a very busy period. We are taking part one by one in a lot of summits, all of which are extremely important. The Prime Minister of the country is scheduled to attend the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in Uzbekistan on 15th and 16th September. This will be the first in-person meeting between the Indian Prime Minister and the Chinese President after the Galwan clashes of 2020. This is also the first SEO summit that will happen physically after the COVID-19 pandemic had begun. India will host the next SEO summit next year, and India will also be the president of UNSC for December 2022. Combine that with the hosting of G20, which the government is planning to do in Kashmir. This is a very important and busy period for the Indian diplomats. Many people are saying that the G20 meeting in the upcoming months in India is probably the biggest and the most significant gathering of world leaders ever in India's history in India. The G20, as you know, represents the 20 most advanced and developed economies around the world and make up about 80% of the world's entire GDP. Now, the host nation decides the agenda mainly for these meetings. So there are a lot of talks on what should the Indian government focus on. The authors say that we can learn from Indonesia. So Indonesia will be the president of G20 before India. Indonesia will focus on three key pillars: global health architecture, sustainable energy transition, and digital transformation. While India is free to choose its own initiatives and agenda, many people say that it would make sense for India to carry forward most of what has been started in Indonesia only. One other important point here is that the world right now is at the most divisive stage that it has ever been since the end of the Cold War. There are clearly two groups around the world. One of the Western nations that have been putting increasing sanctions on Russia, and another of those nations which support Russia or are friends with Russia, which do not see anything wrong in the Russia-Ukraine war. Both these groups actually have membership in the G20, and it will be interesting to see how India can actually bring them all together under one single platform, because India has friends on both sides of the aisle. So this gives an opportunity to India to play the role of a mediator. Not just this, the host nation also has a right to invite other nations as well outside the G20 for them to be a part of the summit as an observer. This is where India has an opportunity to invite other developing nations from South America, from Asia, from Africa, that will again establish India's image as the leader in the developing world, bringing their voice to the most important platform throughout the world. As you know, these are all the members nation of G20. Out of them, these are the G8, and if you subtract Russia from it, you will have the G7 group of nations. Remember, these are not 20 nations, these are 19 nations plus the European Union. So please ensure that you remember that. Now, if you look at the evolution of how G20 actually came into being, it does not have any official secretariat of its own. In fact, it was the global financial crisis of 2007 that led to global recession that cemented G20's reputation as the main grouping that will have the responsibility of ensuring that economic crises of these kinds are actually curtailed. The US held the G20 presidency in 2008 and ensured that from now onwards, the meeting of finance ministers and central bank governors translates to the meeting of head of the state. This is where the G20 became such an important group since 2008, because before this, the heads of the nations did not used to meet. After that, G20 has taken multiple steps to ensure that we have a better world at our hand. For example, their efforts have been noted in tackling tax evasion. They have also worked on ensuring financial stability and making policies to ensure that the businesses around the world are running on a much more safer platform. Apart from that, the last few G20 summits have also raised multiple issues and not just economics. They have been focused on climate change, jobs, social security, inequality, agriculture, corruption, terror financing, basically every challenge that we are facing around the world right now. In 2020, in the Riyadh summit, four things were prioritized: the pandemic, global economy, international trade disruptions, and global cooperation. Italy had the presidency in 2021. 2022 is Indonesia's turn, and next year the presidency will come in the hands of India. The next article that we have here is about the recent decision of the US government to provide upgradation of the F-16 fighter jets to Pakistan. As you know, a few days back, the US government decided that they will refurbish the F-16 fighter jets that they had given to Pakistan many years back. F-16, as you know, are the main fighter planes that are used by the Pakistan Air Force for most of their operations. Now, F-16s have always had a very interesting relationship with India. India has time and time again objected to the US supply of F-16 fighter jets to Pakistan, and now the decision of the US government to refurbish those fighter jets has again introduced a negative reaction from India. US on the other hand is saying that we are not supplying any new fighter jets. We are not even supplying any new weapons or missile for those fighter jets. What we are doing is that the old jets that we have already given to Pakistan many decades back, we are just repairing those. Because if some country has bought fighter jets or any weapons from us, it is our responsibility to service them. That is what the US has been saying. Now, if you look at the past US-Pakistan relation, it has been very interesting. US, after the Second World War, had been trying to find a country in South Asia which they can depend on, and they can actually create a base on those nations. India, because of our policy of non-aligned movement, refused to be that country, and Pakistan filled in that void. That is why, since the 1950s itself, Pakistan and US have shared a very interesting relationship. In fact, Pakistan became even more important for US when the US was fighting against the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union were in Afghanistan. So first, to help Afghanistan, US chose Pakistan, and they were sending a lot of weapons and fighter jets to Pakistan. Then, when the US had to fight against Taliban, then again Pakistan became a very important ally for the US. That is why Pakistan US defense acquisitions go a long way back. In fact, in 2016, Barack Obama's administration had decided to give even more F-16s to Pakistan. But thankfully, the US Congress, that is their parliament, did not allow that to happen. You would also remember that the same F-16 jets were used by the Pakistan Air Force against the Indian Air Force recently, one day after the Balakot airstrike, when Captain Abhinandan was also involved in one of these skirmishes. This present contract, which is why the news has been made, was released on 7th of September. Also, it is not for free. Obviously, US will charge the market rate for this to Pakistan. This contract is for $450 million. It's only for engine, electronics, and other hardware and software updates and spare parts. It does not include any new capabilities, any new weapons or radars. So US is saying that India should not have to worry about that. If you look at India-US relation on the other hand, the two sides, despite having a lot of objections to each other's decisions, have been able to maintain very friendly relations. There have been different points of view on Afghanistan. We are on the opposite sides in the Ukraine war as well. Despite taking S-400 missiles from Russia, we have been able to evade the CATSA sanctions as well. So in short, the India-US relationship on the other hand are going through a very good period. And just this decision by Pakistan should not really derail that. Also, you must understand that the present India-US relationship is at such a level that if India today wants to buy the F-16s from US, they can buy any number of F-16s from the US. But the reason why we are not interested is that we have actually moved on to much higher technology. For example, Rafale jets that we have bought from France are a much better technology as compared to F-16. So we are not really worried about that. It's not that F-16 is a more superior plane as compared to what we have in the form of Rafale. It is just that we do not want Pakistan and US to come together on any defense deals. And that is why we have raised objections to Pakistan's F-16 refit agreement from the US. If you look at the history of Pakistan's F-16 acquisition from US, it's a very interesting history. As I said, US has been dependent on Pakistan mainly with respect to what's happening in Afghanistan. It was in 1981 that US first agreed to sell F-16 jets to Pakistan for the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan because they had to counter that. The idea was that the aircraft will be used to engage the Soviet troops and the Afghan troops across the border. Between 1986 and 1990, the F-16 in Pakistan shot down 10 Afghan and Soviet jets because by the level of 1980, F-16s were one of the most advanced fighter jets in the entire world. They were used against India as well as we discussed in the recent skirmish. It was only after 9/11 attacks that Pakistan-US relationship turned sour and America refused to supply any more F-16s to Pakistan. In fact, the Americans blocked the sale of 18 F-16s despite an advance payment being made because they did not trust what was happening in Pakistan. There is one more thing that you need to understand. It is not just Pakistan. F-16s are used by other nations as well, for example, Turkey. So just in case US would have denied that we will not service or we will not give you spare parts for F-16 right now, even other countries such as Turkey would have done it. It's not that Pakistan's jets would have become bad or expired just because US would have said no. Other nations would have also come to their help. It's not that they don't have any friends. So it's not really a matter of concern for India because if you look at the capabilities of Rafale versus the F-16, the Rafales are way ahead of that. The F-16s were very effective mainly because of the AMRAAM missile that was supplied from the US. That is AMRAAM, which has a beyond visual range of 75 km. But now Rafales can match them step by step and even go much better with respect to their missiles and with respect to their radar and maneuverability as well. The next article that we have here is about retail inflation that is just surging time after time whenever it is being measured. The retail inflation, especially in the food prices, is surging to 7%, which is the cause of concern. In July, it was 6.71%, and in August, it has again reached 7%, mainly because of the food prices increasing. The problem with food prices is that it impacts every single household in the country. There will be no household that would say, no, we don't consume food or food items. That is why it has become a very tricky situation for RBI and for the government to actually control this inflation. This is the eighth successive month that retail inflation has stayed beyond the upper tolerance limit. As you know, the target for inflation in India is 4% plus minus 2%, meaning that the upper limit is 6% while the lower limit is 2%. And it is the eighth consecutive month that we have not been able to curtail this inflation within the 6% target. Economists believe that the RBI may again hike the interest rate, and it might be hiked this time by 35 to 50 basis points, means 0.35 to 0.5% hike might be seen in the interest rates to be announced by the RBI very soon. Now, if you are wondering how does it happen, how does the Reserve Bank of India control this, or what powers do they have, you actually have to look at something called the MPC. MPC here stands for Monetary Policy Committee. The Monetary Policy Committee is a committee that has been formed under the RBI Act in May 2016. This Monetary Policy Committee, in simple terms, says that the central government will make this 6-member committee, and this committee will determine the policy rates to achieve the inflation target. The policy rate means the repo rate and the other kinds of rates that are to be decided by this particular committee. It will have 6 members, do remember. The RBI governor will be the ex officio chairman. Then we'll have the deputy governor who will be in charge of the monetary policy. Third, an officer of the bank to be nominated by the central board. And then 3 people to be appointed by the central government. These people have to be people of ability, integrity, standing, and knowledge and experience in the field of economics, monetary policy, finance, etc. Now, there are different types of monetary policies that are followed. Either expansionary, which means expanding the money supply in the economy, or contractionary, which means sucking out the money supply from the market, depending upon how the bank and the monetary policy committee is looking to control inflation in the market. The next article that we have here is about the Indian government raising concerns over the Sri Lankan government's lack of efforts to ensure a better life for the Tamilian population in Sri Lanka. Now, this is a very interesting article. At a time when India is helping Sri Lanka as much as possible with their economic crisis, at a time when we are sending as much help to Sri Lanka as possible, at the same time the Indian government is actually criticizing Sri Lanka also for not fulfilling its commitment to give all the rights to the Tamil population. This brings you a very important learning in international relations. That is, if you say that the relationship between the two sides is good, that doesn't mean that in all the different aspects the relationship will be good only. Having good relationship doesn't mean that there will be great relationship in every single sector or every single field. For example, in India-Sri Lanka relationship, the relationship might be good on the front of economy. The relationship might be good on the front of tourism or on some other front. But at the same time, at international organizations, we might still criticize each other because every issue is different. Same is the case with India-China. That is, the relationship between the two sides might not be great in most aspects, but don't be surprised if at some international organization, the two countries take a common side. Now, let's come back to this particular issue at hand. India recently at the UN Human Rights Council said that we are concerned that the Sri Lankan government is not making a lot of progress to the promises that it had made. The promises of giving the rights to Tamil population in Sri Lanka. As you know from the history of Sri Lanka has two main population groups. That is the Sinhalese population and the Tamil population. As per Sri Lankan government, the Tamilians in Sri Lanka are those who have a connection with India. Most probably, the Tamils in Sri Lanka were brought to Sri Lanka by the British from India to work on their plantation labors. And after Sri Lanka got independence, the government of Sri Lanka have not given any rights to the Tamil population, and they think that the Tamil population does not belong to Sri Lanka originally, and that is why they do not deserve equal rights as compared to the Sinhalese population. This is what led to the civil war as well. And many countries around the world have been urging Sri Lanka to give equal rights to Tamil population, and Sri Lanka has never been able to fulfill that promise. Now, India says that we have always believed in the responsibility of the states for promotion and protection of human rights, and the Sri Lankan government should ensure that the human rights of the Tamil population are also respected. The Indian delegate notes the concern of lack of progress made by the Sri Lankan government on their commitments to ensure that full implementation of 13th Amendment is made. 13th Amendment basically in Sri Lankan constitution was to ensure equal rights to be given to the Tamil population. The Indian delegation also said that the provincial governments were made to ensure that Tamil population was given their rights, but even these provincial councils have expired and the re-elections have not happened for many years. India has been helping Sri Lanka in the current economic crisis. We have already extended about $4 billion of assistance to Sri Lanka without criticizing Sri Lanka on its economic policies as many other nations have done. Along with China and Japan, India is one of the largest helpers of Sri Lanka in the ongoing crisis in the country. Now, if you look at the issue of Tamil population in Sri Lanka, it goes a long way back since their independence in 1948. As I said, right after the independence, the Sinhalese population of Sri Lanka were given all the rights, while the Tamil population were denied even citizenship because they had an ancestral connection with India. There was also discrimination on the basis of language, where Sinhalese was made the official language of Sri Lanka, and those who spoke Tamil were not even allowed to get jobs or even to get their admission into the schools. There was discrimination on the basis of religion as well. While Buddhism was given the primary place in the state, the people who did not follow Buddhism, who followed Hinduism or any other religion, were not given any employment opportunities. And it was not just about discrimination. In fact, in 1970s, the Sri Lankan army targeted the Tamil population with the help of the government. The Tamil population was segregated, many of them not allowed to vote in the election, many of them killed at the hands of the armed forces. And when this became such a routine trend, that is when the Tamil militancy actually came up to fight against the Sri Lankan army. This is what led to the rise of LTTE. It was a Tamil organization to fight against the discrimination that was given at the hands of the Sri Lankan army. This fight between the LTTE and the Sri Lankan army became the huge civil war in Sri Lanka, in which the Indian government also got involved, and it also resulted in the eventual assassination of India's ex-Prime Minister Sri Rajiv Gandhi. These were the important articles in the Hindu newspaper for today. There are a couple of practice questions for you. Number 1. What role does a monetary policy committee play in controlling inflation in the country? Assess the performance of the MPC in this regard. Second, G20's presidency presents an opportunity for India to further its agenda of bringing the developed and developing world together. Elaborate. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video. Have a good day ahead.